name is Eryn, and I run a restorative landscape design company in Denver. We focus on ecological gardens, so gardens that save water, that are low maintenance, that are working with Colorado, not against it. And the business is designed to be affordable and accessible for different people and involve community, stuff like that. So this is my thing, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I first want to address that I've been getting a lot of communication from people who are scared about the drought and the state of our lack of winter this year. People have been sending me messages like, Eryn, I'm scared and everything's gonna die. And what if I can't plant anything? If I plant a flower, it will die. My grass will die. We will all die. I will die. I will be found last on the desiccated corpse of my lawn in the climate apocalypse. And I absolutely understand those concerns. And they're like, Eryn, can you help me? The answer is no, I cannot help you face your fear of death, and I cannot change climate breakdown. But what I can do is help you figure out how to navigate the challenges of your yard at the same time as you're navigating climate collapse and everything else in our world that seems overwhelming right now. So that's what I'm going to do here today, is I'm going to talk to you about how to work with your yard in a way that's intelligent, in a way that sets you up for long-term success and not like repeated hassles and headaches. In a way that's low maintenance, pollinator friendly, bird friendly, doesn't require long-term water if you don't want to give it long-term water. And what else? You're going to find out what else. This workshop is focused on concepts and on design thinking. It's about how to think about the big picture of your landscape or the area that you want to renovate. We're doing a 102 workshop on, I think, March 31st. It's going to be more focused on the nitty-gritty of how to install stuff, how to do the irrigation, what kind of mulch you use, where do you get the plants. Some of that I will be touching on very briefly today, though. And I'm going to leave you with some resources at the end of the day in case you can't make it to the second one and you want those answers for yourself. So, let's start with some context for what we're dealing with, which is that we've done some dumb things when it comes to landscaping and how we take care of the land in this world and in this country, and even in Colorado, where we take better care of our wild spaces than other places. This meme always makes me laugh. Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea and their beautiful vision for the future. What I'm trying to say is landscaping, sometimes it's a celebration of life, sometimes it's a tragedy. And we get to play a role in that even now, even though a lot of decisions have already been made. I'm here in Denver, Colorado. I know you guys are from all over Colorado, but I'm guessing quite a few of you are from Denver and Boulder. And Denver, before colonization, was shortgrass prairie. So it was flowers, short textured ornamental grasses, butterflies and bees and birds and foxes and bunnies, and stuff like that. It was gorgeous. And you could still see little traces of this here and there, the Pawnee Buttes Prairie, for example. This, I did not go back in time. This is not a real picture. This is AI generated. But these are some real pictures from Pawnee Butte, which is the closest big stretch of original shortgrass prairie. And you can see how beautiful it was. Depending on where you live, you might have been in the shortgrass prairie if you were in the yellow area in the plains. You might be in the foothills if you're in the light green area. Or you could be in the mountains if you're in the dark green. And of course, blue and white is going up to the alpine realm. And we're more familiar with how our natural ecosystem looks in the foothills and in the mountains. We get more bushes and more trees. So when I talk about Coloradoscaping, when I talk about landscaping in a way that's working with Colorado, not against it, that might be easier to envision if you live in the mountains than if you live in the prairie and you've never actually seen what the plains looked like before we covered it in sidewalk and CVS's and little patches of sod. Um, yeah, so when you're in nature, it might be easy to remember that you're a thing of nature. You belong on this planet. That your soul sings with the birds deep down, that your feet are on the earth. When you're in the cities, it can be harder to remember that. It can be harder to feel connected to our environment. That also makes it harder for us to be good stewards of our environment. But gardening is a way of really coming home to where you are in the world and what it means to be part of the world right where you are by paying attention to what's happening here with the plants, with the water, with the animals, and how you can be a part of that. So when we talk about landscaping in the climate apocalypse, the general apocalypse, depending on your mood and how you feel about the state of the world right now, landscaping can be a way to celebrate life, a way to responsibly steward water and other resources so that there's more for everybody. It can be a relationship with the land that helps you feel more connected and strong. It can be a way to express yourself and create beauty or fun, creating connection, stuff to eat, utility. And many of you are here because it can also be extremely challenging and overwhelming. How do you deal with something that feels overwhelming step by step? How do we also not do what we have a history of doing in the history of landscaping and colonization in this country, and not just rush in with quick fixes that are going to create more problems later, but actually slow down and pay attention to what's the wisest way to move forward with this. More of the context we are sitting in includes, of course, we're in this period of massive drought, and climate forecasts suggest that by sometime between 2050 and 2080, Colorado's climate is going to resemble New Mexico's or Texas's, which means basically that we're going to continue to lose water, and we need to be smart about the water that we do have. We're also going to have climate refugees probably moving into Colorado from the Southwest, which means that the water's going to need to stretch even further. And we're really feeling that this summer or this winter in this weird snowless winter. Colorado water use mostly goes to crops that feed cattle. This is my nervous system stumbling over my words. It mostly goes to crops that feed cattle. But there is also a fair amount that goes to residential use. And about 50% of that is outdoor use, meaning mostly lawns and sprinklers. So the amount that we are using to water our yards right now is not insubstantial. We also waste a lot of water here in the cities because water flows off the roofs, down through the gutters, down our driveways into these detainment basins where most of it evaporates, and it doesn't always actually get into the ground where it can kind of be a more efficient and building part of the water cycle. We are also sitting in a context of biodiversity loss that is a part of this presentation because it's relevant to how you build a garden. We've lost an enormous amount of forest, a tragic amount of forest in the US in the last 400 years. The red here is what we used to have in terms of prairie in the US, and the blue is what is left in anything resembling grasslands. Most of that is not it's not original shortgrass prairie. It's not old growth. And what we're seeing worldwide is a really terrifying level of decline in world wildlife, as well as specifically pollinators and insects. Um, in the US alone, about 50% of our 4,000 native bees that we have in the US are endangered of extinction right now. And you've probably noticed that if you've been alive for a while. Even and I'm 37, so I'm not that old. But I remember driving for all the birds on the windshields. The birds on the windshields. Oh my God, the bugs on the windshields. When I am nervous because I have been told I'm about to speak to 800 faceless people, I often switch my words around for no reason, and I say birds instead of bugs. So there are so many bugs on the windshield, right? And now they're not there anymore. That's a noticeable thing. In Colorado, we are facing more and more of our water is going to start to fall as rain instead of snow, which is going to impact our mountain streams and is definitely impacting wildfire danger, as we all know. Our forests haven't been very well managed and keeps getting drier and hotter. And then we end up with huge sections where we're losing biodiversity. And all of this is happening at the same time that we are mowing our lawns and watering them 3 times a week, which is exhausting and wasteful and seems ridiculous. And why are we doing this? I'm going to talk about why we're doing this and what we should do instead. It feels pretty silly. So now that I've cheered you up with all of that, let's talk about how we got here. So your ancestors, I don't know where your ancestors came from in the world. Oh shit, I just lost my headphones and I have no idea why. Sorry about this, guys. 1 second. It's very weird. Allie, can you still hear me?
Yes, yeah, we're able to hear you. You
Okay.
didn't drop out on sound.
I'm not sure what happened there. I'm gonna give my headphones a moment, um, and keep going just like
Okay,
this. Okay.
sounds good.
I like seeing Allie's face. That makes me feel less scared. Can I put you in the middle? Okay. All right. So I don't know who your ancestors were, but they probably had gardens in front of their houses. And I I wish I could. Sorry, one technical moment, you guys. Let's see. I'm just trying to figure out how to see you while I see my screen, Allie, and I can't figure that out, which is annoying. So, and I thought we had it figured out before the workshop, but now you're disappearing again. Oh well. Okay. Okay, so you probably had vegetables in front of your house, flowers, things like that. If you lived hundreds of years ago, eventually, if you go back far enough, we're all indigenous to somewhere. And what we see when we travel around the world and we look at how indigenous people live, including here in the US still, we see that indigenous people tend to move in a way where they're sort of constantly in communion with the land. They are planting and transplanting as they go. They are scattering seeds. They are weeding or burning in ways that help what they want to grow. And as a result of their tending the land, they tend to be fed by the land in return. So that's the type of relationship that we used to have with the land. That include things like prescribed burns that kept forest fires from getting out of control. But instead, we're doing this thing, which is a little bit weird with the green carpet around the houses. And this actually comes from the colonial days. It comes from kings and castles. Because if you are going to build a castle, you need to cut the trees down around it so no one can scale your castle. And then you might as well have this big utility-less area for parties. It's kind of a way to show off. You don't need to grow vegetables in your front yard. You can just have this place that just looks pretty to entertain. And this became a fashion among the nobility in Europe. And then it was something that we took over when we meaning obviously not all Americans, but a lot of Americans, like me, who our ancestors came over from Europe. So we brought the lawns with us, basically. They were like the fashionable thing of trying to look like kings and live like kings. The downside to looking like kings and living like kings is that now the earth is mostly covered in uh, humans and animals that we eat. The other downside is that we really haven't adapted our landscaping strategies as we've moved over from New England. New England is very lush and wet, just like Europe, like England. Colorado is a lot drier, so we can't really grow the same species here. Typical lawn grass, what you think of when you think of grass, is called Kentucky bluegrass. It's from the mountains of Eurasia, and it needs a lot of extra water and mowing here. This seems especially dumb because we have something called buffalo grass that's native to Colorado that was growing here before anyone was watering it, that only grows 6 inches tall and then it stops. So you never have to mow it. And it doesn't need long-term irrigation to survive, although if it gets a little extra irrigation from you every once in a while, it's greener and lusher. These are my feet in my buffalo grass lawn. It's pretty silly that we don't have more buffalo grass lawns and we have so many lawns that we're unnecessarily watering and mowing. That's something I'm going to talk about later in this presentation is lawn options. So, okay, so this is the portion of the workshop where I have given you the context for why things are frustrating. And then the question I have really for you is like, what are you passionate about? What do you want to tackle in this world where there's so many problems that are related to how we interact with the land? Because there are a lot of different ways to approach landscaping that are regenerative, that are better than what we have been doing. You could care about water, you could care about pollinators, you could care about feeding your community. There's a lot of different options. And it's all better than just mowing and watering lawn that no one is using. So we're going to take a quick poll, Allie, and maybe I can figure out, awesome. Maybe while people are answering this, I can figure out the tech thing that I'm struggling with. How do you feel about your yard right now? I'd like to hear from you guys. And then Allie, let me know when people have voted.
That's good. I think we will end it here, everyone. So I'll end it. If you all, I'll give maybe like 5 more seconds for you to answer if you haven't quite yet. Um, and end the poll, and I can share the results as well here.
Excited about butterflies, birds, and bees is number one. Worried about water and weeds is number two. Inspired to make it gorgeouser is number three. I am not surprised by that. Yeah. Okay. Um, I was hoping I could figure out the aha, now I can see Allie. Oh, this is gonna be better. A real person. Okay. So while we're approaching this, while we're trying to figure out how we go about redoing things in a way that is creating more habitat and more beauty and stewarding resources more wisely. The good news is that not only do you have people like me to help lay things out for you in a one-on-one fashion, but also this land knows how to be beautiful. This land knows how to be successful. There are so many amazing, amazing, amazing plants here who know how to rock it here. And we're going to talk about native plants. Now, I am not a purist. I'm not saying you need to use all native plants in your landscape. There are a lot of awesome low water plants from similar climates around the world that can do well here. But our native plants are so beautiful and so incredible, and they do great in your garden. And I'm going to talk to you about why. So, first of all, native plants in our dry ecosystem have really, really, really deep roots. They are used to surviving long periods of drought. They are used to surviving the occasional year with no water all winter and all summer. Yes, things are getting drier and getting worse over time. That's true. But our plants are really built to survive situations like that. Their roots are beautiful. They stabilize the soil. If they burn off, they don't release most of the carbon into the atmosphere because most of their life is in the soil. Native plants are also well adapted to our crazy Colorado weather. So for example, if you have I have a cherry tree, a peach tree, and a pear tree in my front yard right now, and they are all starting to bud out because they all think that it's spring. My serviceberry and my chokecherry, which are native fruit trees, they are not budding out because they're like, no, I know what's up. Like, this is like the first of many false springs. Like, no, 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 it's not time. They're hip to it. But non-natives, they don't always know how to surf the waves of our roller coaster weather. Our natives also tend to look gorgeous year round, including in winter. They're used to looking beautiful with snow on them. And yeah, there's just so many native plants. This is Rocky Mountain bee plant, which I think looks like if an alien and a fairy had a baby. And it's just such a beautiful flower. There's so many amazing native plants. I'm going to show you a few of them. In the winter, there's a lot of color and texture with our native plants. Why don't I show you? I will stop the share and then I'm going to show you some pictures of native plants on a different resource. This is on my website, restorative-landscape-design.com. Definitely not the only place to look at amazing pictures of native plants, but here are some wildflowers that I love that are native to Denver that look fantastic in your yard. And there's a sunny section here. There's also a shady section, and I'm going to link this at the end of the presentation. There's also a spreadsheet here. This spreadsheet has all of the plants I know that are native to our area and lots of information about them. These are ones that you can buy commercially that are great for your yard. So this includes what color they are, what texture, when they bloom. Are they a short-lived filler or a long-lived perennial? Are they native to Colorado or nearby bioregions? Uh, what's some cool ethnobotany facts about them? How do Native Americans use them and how are they still using them? Wildlife value, what uh, pollinators and birds and mammals are dependent on this plant, stuff like that. So this spreadsheet is a publicly available resource that is great. Um, and I do not know how to uh, I don't know how to just switch over. I have to stop the share and then restart it. So sorry for my tech clunkiness. Okay. All right. The other thing that I love about native plants is that they support our native biodiversity. This is because if you think about being a plant that bugs eat, you would probably like to avoid being eaten, at least avoid being eaten too much, right? So plants over thousands of years, they evolve different ways of protecting themselves. They make themselves hard to digest. And there's other strategies as well, but that is a very common one. Bugs want to eat plants. But if you are trying to adapt your body and evolve to meet the challenges of thousands of different plants that are all trying to make themselves hard to eat in different ways, that's a tall order. There are some bugs that are generalists. Japanese beetles are a great example. They'll eat anything. They've evolved to be able to eat anything. But actually, about 90% of herbivorous insects, that's insects that eat plants, they can only eat native plants, meaning they can only eat plants that they have co-evolved with over thousands of years in the same area. Their bodies can't digest non-native plants often. So what that means is that we end up starving our native insects by not having enough native plants for them. And of course, we have native plants in wild areas, like in national parks and state parks, but our cities end up becoming these giant food deserts that are difficult for insects to move through. And then you can end up with these like isolated, dwindling populations of insects in wild areas where we don't actually have butterflies on our streets, which is a bit tragic. Great example of this is the monarch butterfly. I'm sure that many of you are aware that it's endangered right now. This is the caterpillar, and the caterpillar can only eat milkweed, this beautiful native wildflower, when it is in caterpillar form. It's co-evolved with this plant over thousands of years, and that's just its plant. So if you plant this flower in your yard, you will probably have monarchs come and visit and maybe lay eggs. If you don't, then they have less to eat. Let's see. That also affects bees. So there are, like I said, 4,000 species of native bees, half are endangered. So many of those are specialists that can only eat certain types of pollen. They can actually only digest the nectar textures and only recognize as food pollen that they have been eating for thousands of years. Again, not all bees. Some bees are generalists, like European honeybees, which is what most people think of when they think of bees. They can drink any flower they can fit themselves into. But there are so many really cool native bees that need our native flowers in order to survive. And they have these amazing interdependent relationships with them, like these cute little bees that sleep in the globe mallow flower and only drink globe mallow juice and then pollinate the globe mallow flower. It's pretty adorable, and you can have them in your front yard if you plant globe mallow flowers. Most of us are familiar with the general concept of pollination and how they form these sort of lock and key relationships with flowers. What this flower is getting out of making itself that specific shape is that only hummingbirds can fit into it. And then hummingbirds are going to go around to other flowers of the same type. And that's going to help pollinate it in a way that's efficient and keeps the pollen circulating through the same species of flower. So The flower gets a specialist pollinator specializing just in helping it reproduce, and the hummingbird gets a flower that only it can access, that other pollinators can't fit into. And we see that with all sorts of different pollination, um, with tiny bees that can fit into flowers that other bees can't fit into, for example. It's pretty cool. So if you want more pollinators, you got to plant the native bees that they've co-evolved with. This is a burb, very clearly. It's fluffy enough to be a burb. And native plants are also really important to birds, okay, because birds eat bugs, right? First of all, if you're not familiar with what a burb is, this is a little diagram just explaining among birders, we've got birds, we've got burbs, and then if they get fluffier, we get borbs, and occasionally, very occasionally, you might get a blorb. So that's why I'm calling it a burb, just so you get your your terms down. So birds have to eat bugs year round, but especially in nesting season, they have to feed their babies so many insects. We're talking thousands of insects over like a 6 week period. And if you're thinking that sounds crazy, just remember that birds are dinosaurs, right? We all know that now. So if you had like four baby T-Rexes in your living room, just screaming like eat all day while they're trying to like double in size every week so that an eagle won't come and pick them off where they're small and vulnerable, like that would be a lot of pressure to bring in meat. So when I tell you that an average chickadee family needs like 6,000 insects over a 6 week period to bring a whole nest of babies to term, like it's a mind-blowing number. That amount of insects can't be found on non-native plants. It just can't. That doesn't mean that non-native plants are bad, because there's room for everybody in this world. And if we give it a few thousand years, our birds and bugs will be able to evolve to whatever plants are here then. But we're going to lose so much biodiversity if we don't hold on to the native plants that we have, and if we don't restore populations of native plants. Because, they've done studies, and like Doug was telling me, did this amazing study in Seattle. And if chickadee parents didn't have 70% or more native plant biomass within their short flying range, which was like, I don't know, I want to say 150 feet or 150 yards. Like there's only so far that they can fly efficiently, right, to bring back enough insects to the nest. If that area didn't have enough native plant biomass, they had more adults dying each year than they had babies surviving each year. And that's what we're seeing year after year. That's why here in the US grasslands, we've lost 48% of our birds since 1970, is there just aren't enough bugs for them, which of course affects all of us, because if there's not enough pollinators, it's really going to affect our ability to eat food, because most of our crops do rely on wild pollination. So the pollinator crisis, the biodiversity crisis, obviously it's all related to us. The cool thing is that we can do something about it by planting native plants. And very conveniently, this also happens to be a way to make a beautiful, low maintenance garden in your front yard. You and I, we cannot solve climate problems, any of us, all by our own. I would like to restore habitat for the orcas in my backyard, but I can't. But what I can do is plant some flowers for bees. I can do something. I can do something with my plot of land that reverses the tide of destruction on our planet right where I am, right where my feet are. I can plant a stake here and say, hey, my front yard is going to be beautiful. My front yard is going to feed everybody. It's going to feed the birds. It's going to feed the butterflies. It's going to feed the bees. And it's going to feed everyone's eyes when they walk past, and their noses, and their inner sense of joy. So, when it comes to native plants, I already showed you that little lookbook of pictures and the spreadsheet. I'm going to talk more in the next 102 workshop about where and how to get plants. One other thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is that there are so many awesome edible and medicinal uses of our native plants. There's this incredibly rich history of amazing relationships between the native people of this land and the plants and the ways that they use them. Oftentimes, when we think of edible medicinal plants, we might think of like tomatoes and lavender, but yeah, the plants that we're growing here all had really amazing uses, and it's really fun to learn about them and try making things and eating things from your backyard. We'll talk more about sourcing in the next workshop, but I am including in these slides, which you guys have access to, some ways to figure out how to buy native plants in your area from local nurseries or garden programs. Okay. How are we doing on time, Allie?
We are good. We have 50 minutes left, 7:10, so I think plenty of
Perfect.
time.
Thanks so much. We are on time. Okay, I am getting a little bit less nervous now that we're looking at pictures of flowers and I'm talking about bees.
Yeah, this is fantastic. The colorful, it's important to have the context, but the colorful images I think we're all excited about as well. So appreciate.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Um, I got into this work because I really fell in love with being in nature, and I had the privilege to live in some places and stay in some places where humans were really integrated into nature. Like, for example, I stayed for a while in this indigenous village on the outside of the Chitwan jungle in Nepal. And you'd roll out of your mud hut and walk outside, and there'd be like butterflies and birds everywhere, and like giant snails crossing your path. And like, there's a rhino, and you're like, ah. And then there's children skipping down the path and you know, playing games that they've made up using sound effects they can make with the reeds and people fishing in the little ponds that they keep there. And it was like amazing to be in a place where people were so integrated with nature. It was so joyful. It was so beautiful. It was so transformative. And I became very homesick for that experience when I moved back to the States. And I was always trying to get away into nature. um, you know, go on a hike, escape it all. Um, I used to lead workshops and retreats that would help people connect with nature. But I felt like nature was asking for my attention in my yard. My yard was mostly invasive weeds. I knew a lot about gardening, but I wasn't doing very much about it because I wasn't that interested in vegetable gardening personally myself. I was really interested in how to bring back that sense of beauty and abundance. And I didn't know how to do that in my front yard. And that is where my business came from. And that is where my orientation is towards towards the sacredness of how beautiful nature can be. And why can't our streets look like that? Why can't our streets teem with that kind of beauty? There's a lot of different ways it can look. You know, you can restore the prairie in your front yard, or you can build a classic xeriscape, like this design that we built with Wild Rose Landscaping, where you can see more gravel between flowers and there's rock elements, and it's very clearly a garden. This is another RLD design that is designed more to be like prairie restoration. It's a mix of flowers and grasses that's really low maintenance. Some of my clients are really obsessed with succulents, which is also a great way to do it. This is my backyard. I have a buffalo grass lawn surrounded by a border of flowers. You know, this is not a big departure from the lawn of kings. Lawns are very useful and nice for some purposes, but it's still surrounded by native plants, and it still hosts a lot more life than a typical lawn would. at the Denver Botanic Gardens, there's this evergreen garden that's mostly using Colorado evergreens, but they're pruned. So it's like a Japanese garden, and it's very beautiful and peaceful, and tranquil to be there. I'm showing you these images because I want you to understand, and I'm going to talk more about your design options in this workshop, that there are so many different ways you can design a low water, low maintenance, pollinator and bird friendly native plant garden. So many different ways you can do it, based on your style, your vibe, what really speaks to you, what really makes your heart sing, and what you want to offer to the world through your tiny little slice of a yard. Obviously, putting paths and nooks in yards is an important part of landscape design that we're going to talk a little bit more about later. What I want to invite you to do here, and Allie, I'll ask you to put up the poll, but not quite yet, is just take a moment to imagine, no matter where you are sitting, just imagine that you are standing in your yard, your backyard or your front yard, or whatever area you're most interested in possibly redoing. And I want to invite you to close your eyes, all many hundreds of faceless people listening to me. And you don't have to do this because I'm not a cold leader, so do whatever the fuck you want. But I want to invite you to do this with me. Just picture yourself in your yard. Feel the ground underneath your feet. Feel the tug of gravity, how you're heavy. And even though the earth is spinning, you can't fall off. Notice that there is a connection between you and this land. You may not have words for it. Maybe it feels magical to you. Maybe it feels scientific to you. Maybe you don't have words for it. But there is some kind of felt sense of connection between you and your yard. And I want you to ask yourself, if your yard was going to say something to you, or if you were going to say something to your yard, what would it be? If it helps, maybe imagine that your yard has taken fairy form and is standing in front of you, anthropomorphically represented. What would you say to your yard? What would it say back to you? Okay, you can open your eyes. I ask you to do this because if landscape design doesn't start with listening, and if it doesn't start with authenticity, then what's the point? Then we're just managing and scrabbling around, which is how we got ourselves into this situation in the first place. So, Allie, if you want to pop the second poll up in there, I'm kind of curious. I know that this poll is not going to in any way encompass the full spectrum of your answers, but I'm wondering if it falls into one of these categories. When I listen to my yard, I notice that my thing that I want to say to it is something like, I want you to be better. And my yard is saying something back to me like, be patient, which feels like a good message for me in my life in general. You might want to take a moment here to journal or draw and answer the poll, and then in a minute we'll keep going.
Ready,
That's
I'll
your lead.
pause the poll. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it looks like it's slowing down. So I was going to pause the poll now and share the results. If that's okay, Erin.
Yeah, go for it.
Great.
Give me
All
life.
righty.
44%. Nice. Thanks for doing that with me. Um, let's keep going. But what I want to invite you all to do at some point as you're thinking about how to design your yard is to do that either in real life or in your imagination, where you go out to your yard, you connect with it, and then after you connect with it, just see like what do you envision? What does your heart want? What inspirations come up? What do you love about this space already that you want to enhance? What feels like it needs some tending to be not quite so terrible? Questions like that. That's really, really the basics of landscape design. Um, yeah, I'm gonna keep talking about the technical stuff. I think, Ali, I might actually I feel like the Q&A may be more helpful if I get further through the technical stuff and do it more at the end.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Yeah, so why don't we won't do Q&A yet, but I just want to give you guys a few minutes to journal or go to the bathroom or get tea or think about what your visions are for your yard. And then we're going to get into more of the technical aspects in a minute. All right, let's keep going. So, to talk about how to make the garden low maintenance and low water. First thing is, if we're going to do it how nature does it, nature somehow manages to be low maintenance, low water, and also beautiful. Don't know how she does that. But besides using native plants, we also want to think about density and layers and biodiversity in your front yard. What I mean by that is nature, in case you haven't noticed, will cover every single crack. Nature is really into abundance and biodiversity and life. And if there is an empty space, a weed will probably take it. If there is a crack in the concrete, a weed will probably take it. What we see in old growth ecosystems is that not only do plants grow really, really densely side by side, but they also grow in dense layers vertically. So there's taller plants and then there's shorter plants. In a prairie, that looks like something like purple coneflower. Its head may be visible above a lower canopy of grasses and shorter flowers and um, sages and things like that. In a rainforest, it looks like vines and bushes and different heights of trees, as well as forest floor ground covers. Even under the soil are grasses and flowers and bushes and trees. They work together to take all the available space and nutrients. Grasses tend to have more fibrous roots, flowers have more direct up and down tap roots, and then tree roots tend to go out more to the side. So when you layer them all together, they take up all the available sunlight and they take up all the available space under the ground. This is why old growth ecosystems, like old growth prairies, old growth forests, are really resistant to invasive weeds because they're using up all the available spaces in the ecosystem. There isn't an open niche, right? Invasive weeds tend to move into disturbed areas, areas where there are length spaces. And sometimes, weeds can be beneficial and help covering the ground where there is nothing. But an invasive weed means something that no bugs or birds eat it. It doesn't control competitors. Um, it doesn't give much to the environment here, and it tends to, once it has a foothold, just slowly take over of every available space. We'll talk more about weeds in the next workshop, what is great and difficult. But in general, when you're planting your garden, what you want to think about is the more ground covers you have that have texture, presence, or are evergreen year round. So this includes grasses, sedges, wild strawberries, pussy toes, succulents, things like that. The lower maintenance your landscape is going to be because there will be less room for weeds to blow in. That also includes flowers and bushes and trees that have strong textures year round. So, for example, this is the big garden in Waff Park, built and tended to by the amazing Skylar Smith. I was just there visiting it with my crew this last week. This is what it looks like in winter. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous year round. And there isn't a lot of room for weeds there because it's very dense and there's a diversity of different types of plants. So when we're thinking about ground covers, you can think about ground covers. They don't necessarily have to be evergreen, but that really have presence year round. The more of them you have, sort of like a carpet or in big groups, the more of them you have in your landscape, the lower maintenance it's going to be. And, those ground covers are going to be different for sun versus shade. In the plains area, like in Denver, for example, this area was all short grasses and short flowers. So short grasses in our sunny yards do so, so well. And then in shade, we can use ground covers that grow in the foothills and in the forests and have more shade tolerance, like wild strawberries or creeping Colorado holly or buckwheat. If you don't like all your plants crowded up together, that's fine. It will be a little bit higher maintenance for you, but you can use mulching instead to keep the ground covered. That is what nature does. This is Japungu Sculpture Park in Loveland, built by the growers at the Plains Environmental Center using native plants. And they're using the same strategy here that forests use, covering the ground with leaves to keep new plants from sprouting up. You are all familiar with wood mulch. Wood mulch does need to be replaced regularly. So that's why it's higher maintenance than just having a ton of plants in there. Stone mulch doesn't need to be replaced as regularly for sure, right? It doesn't just degrade every year. So that's a bit lower maintenance. And then you can always use a carpet of a single ground cover like buffalo grass as a green living mulch. If you want it to look a little tidier and you want to see the full canopies of all of the flowers, but you want that density, the low maintenance that is a part of its gardens, where you have plants growing in every crack. So to summarize, what I'm calling green mulch, which is just like a dense mass of plants with plants that hold their space there year round, covering a significant amount of the ground. That's the lowest maintenance, and also tends to be the most naturalistic looking. And then if you want it to be tidier looking, you can use wood mulches or gravel mulches. We'll talk more about mulches in the 102 workshop. We'll also talk about weed barriers more in the 102 workshop. But headline is don't use a weed barrier. They're a maintenance nightmare. But you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get something called X-board, which is like thin cardboard that comes in rolls. Roll that down, cut holes in it, plant the plants in there. And then after you plant, put the mulch on top. And that's really going to cut down on your weeding in the first like 6 months, which is when you are going to be watering one of these low water gardens. And the long-term low water gardens don't need the right low water gardens with the right plants picked for the right places. Doesn't need supplemental water at all, except in times of extreme drought. But if you are watering a low water garden, you'll probably just water it like twice a month, um, deeply in the summer, something like that. And then maybe if it's an established garden, we have a pretty significant period of winter drought like we are having this year. Maybe you'd water it once a month. That's what I'm doing. Um, the point is that in the long term, there's not a lot of water going into the landscape that can feed new weeds. But in the short term, you do have to water them a lot to establish the plant. So it can be helpful to have things like mulch and a biodegradable weed barrier made of something like newspaper, cardboard, or X-board to keep down the weeding. The way that you lay out the plants and the diversity of types of plants that you put in your landscape is going to affect the lushness and the maintenance requirements of your landscape. So to go back to this RLD design that I showed you earlier, this is what we would call traditional mass planting. And what that means is that you have, a group of one flower over here, and then another group of that flower over here, and then there's a group of grasses over here. It's kind of like bacon and eggs, right? Group of flowers next to a group of grasses next to a group of flowers, something like that. This is sort of a traditional perennial garden. A layout of it might look something like this. Maybe these three pink circles are Rocky Mountain penstemons. I think they were in this design. And these three yellow shapes are dwarf rabbit brush, and these three yellow shapes are like little blue stem grass, for example. So they're just in little clusters with something that's similar. I do always advise putting plants in groups in general, because if you have a crazy cacophony mix of 50 different flowers, it's going to look a little wild, and it's also going to be hard for something to really catch your eye. If you plant in groups, and then you're going to be like, whoa, that Colorado 4 o'clock is blooming right now, and I can't not notice it, which is really satisfying for the human eye. It also helps bees navigate. This is another example of traditional plantings in masses, where here at the High Plains Environmental Center, in this beautiful garden, we've got groups of one species, and then a group of a different species, and then a group of a different species. It's a really orderly look. So this is something to consider if you like this look. Another way to organize the plants is what we would call a matrix garden. So instead of eggs and bacon, this is like scrambled eggs, meaning that it's like grass, flower, grass, flower, grass, flower. It's like a carpet, grasses or ground covers, with flowers springing up from inside of it. This is a prairie garden, basically, but matrix gardens can also be forest gardens or shade gardens. Here is an RLD project that my company did in Wheat Ridge. I love this little garden. So what you can see here is that the little green fluffy grasses are blue grama, which used to be the #1 most common plant in Denver. This was blue grama land, so blue grama really loves it here. And we have that scattered through the space, and then we have different wildflowers weaving through it. This is a really, really low maintenance look. I'll show you why. So in winter, let's say that you are like, okay, I got it. If I have a lot of grasses, they cover the ground in winter, it's going to be lower maintenance. So let's say that you have 50-50 grasses and flowers. It matters how you organize them, because if you have something like a matrix like this, where you just have sort of an even carpet of grasses, when the flowers disappear, there's less space for weeds. There's less big open spaces. If you have a lot of grasses here, but you cluster them like this, it is going to be lower maintenance, in that all of these grasses are going to keep weeds from moving in here over the winter, but you end up with more of these big open spaces where weeds can move in over the winter when the flowers disappear. Not all flowers disappear in winter, but a lot of them do. And then, of course, there's something in between it that's kind of like an artistic. I'm going to put a grass here and put a grass there, like I'm playing jazz piano. Works too. Um, so basically, that's something to think about. Do I want an even carpet of ground covers? Do I want to just have some ground covers here and there? And then the flowers get placed in groups in a way that's interwoven among them, no matter where you put them. So matrix gardens, if they have a lot of grasses in them, for example, in this prairie garden and Denver Botanic Gardens has a lot of grasses in it. This is super, super, super low maintenance. Also beautiful. If you want to have a lot of flowers and just a little bit of grasses, you can do that. It's going to be a little bit higher maintenance, but more colorful. Just remember that more grasses or more ground covers means lower maintenance, but also if you weave them in, if you sprinkle them in somewhat evenly so that they're here and there covering your whole landscape, that's also going to make it lower maintenance. And that's what we call a matrix garden. It's a garden of plants of different shapes, different seasonality that are mixed in together so that they cover the ground in a thorough and naturalistic way. The other nice thing to creating something like a matrix garden where you have a lot of ground covers, this is also true with mass plantings when you have a lot of ground covers, even if they're in little clusters, is that you do get to look at the textures year round. This is little blue stem, one of my favorite native plants in my backyard, and I absolutely love looking at it in winter. It's so beautiful. So to summarize, if you want it lower maintenance, go for a matrix garden. Sprinkle ground covers or grasses throughout the space and then put flowers in groups around it. If you want it higher maintenance, then you can put them in little clumps, clump of flowers here, clump of grasses there. And then the other thing to pay attention to is density, right? The more plants you have crammed in there, the lower maintenance it's going to be, and the less water it will be because it's going to keep moisture in the soil. It's going to be a lusher environment. If you have a lot more space in between the plants, then the ground dries out more and you have more weeds. Now, the more plants you plant, the more expensive it is. So that's the other issue with this choice point here. Your job as the garden tender is to find a sweet spot for yourself between what's going to be the lowest maintenance, what's going to be the level of maintenance that you can handle, what is aesthetic that you like, and what you can afford. But if you want to do something like a really dense planting with a lot of plants, you can use a program like our Garden in a Truck program, which we named inspired by Resource Central's Garden in a Box program, which I will link at the end of this presentation, where we bring you a ton of plants from the wholesale nursery for like $2 a pop. We pick them out for you as well if you tell us about what you want for your yard. Okay, so that is sort of the basics to what are different ways to design a given space where you know I want to put low water perennials that pollinators like in this space. That's the basics for that. But some of you are also looking at whole landscapes, and this is also part of landscape design, is like, how do I think about my entire property? How do I think about this entire site? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I'd say, first of all, if you're looking at a big property with a lot of different areas, start by breaking down those areas. One way that you want to break them down is by irrigation zone if you have automatic irrigation. That's because if you're going to use, for example, sprinklers to establish a new garden, it's much easier to do that all at one time. So for example, if one here is one sprinkler irrigation zone, just convert one space at a time and then use the sprinklers to get it going and then have that area all on one schedule altogether. It's going to be a lot easier in the long term if you break it up by zone. You also want to break it up by microclimate, right? Because if you have a shady area, that's going to require different plants than a sunny area. You can use the spreadsheet that I showed you guys earlier, which I will link at the end of this presentation, to find plants for your yard that are native and pollinator and bird friendly and are good for full shade, part shade, super dry and sunny, sunny with a little bit of irrigation, and everything in between. I'll talk a little bit more about plant selection in the 102 workshop, but for now, just know that you're going to be trying to find the right plants for the right places. So it's important to move in your yard where is sunny, where is shady. You also want to think about purposes, like what areas are you going to go to more that could be higher maintenance? What areas are you going to spend less time in that you want to be as low maintenance as possible? And of course, other things to think about include where is it colder? Where is it warmer? Where is it drier? Where is it wetter? Where does water tend to flow? Is it windy or icy in certain places? Do you want privacy in certain places? Do you want to block views from outside your property, or do you want to maintain views from your windows? Do you want to block noise or smell? Where are your utilities? Right? Most utilities are not going to impact your landscaping that much unless you need to plant trees. But if you're planting trees, you definitely need to know where your utilities are. If you have fiber optic internet, sometimes fiber optic cables are really, really shallow under the ground and you can accidentally cut them, which can be expensive. If you're planting something deep rooted right next to a clay sewer line, that's going to create a lot of problems for you. So you want to call 811 and find out where the utilities are. If 811 will mark all the publicly known utilities. If they don't know where something is, like maybe a private company built the sewer line, they don't know where the sewer line is, then you can call a private utility location company to help you figure that out. You also want to pay attention to how water is moving through the space. Where is it pooling? Where is it gathering? Where would it be good if it pooled or gathered because it could water your landscape? Where is it perhaps running off the landscape into the street and not feeding anything? We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. And of course, you want to pay attention to like what's already living on my property, what's already doing well, what birds are living in what trees. How do we already use this space? How do I tend to walk? What parts of it do I like or dislike? What feels like a good way of celebrating the gifts of this land? What feels like it needs protection or change in order to be better? So you might want to make yourself a map as you think about all of these things. Questions like where's cold, where's hot, where's shady, where's sunny, these are also relevant to what you plant where. So if you have a pocket like this, it's going to be colder in the bottom of the pocket. If you have a hill, it's going to be warmer and sunnier on top of the hill if the sun is shining on it. If you're planting a non-native fruit tree, so some non-native fruit trees that do well here include apple, pear, peach, plum, sour cherry, apricot, jujube, stuff like that. These non-native fruit trees do have a tendency to bloom too early. They will bloom like now, like my trees are doing outside, and then the frost will like kill the flowers, and then they won't fruit for you, or they can get damaged or die because of a roller coaster spring weather. So to protect them, you may want to put them on the north side of your house or on the side of a tree that shelters it from the sun in the early spring. Or alternatively, you could put it something like in the blazing sun right next to a patio where it's going to get a lot of extra warmth and protection from hardscaping. But you want to think about placing it in a way that will protect it in some way from that roller coaster spring weather. You want to think about
Erin, I
how,
just wanted to pop in to give you the 15 minute. We're at 7:45 mark, so just wanted to flag that for you.
thank you. I'm a little
Yeah.
bit behind. Okay, I appreciate that. You want to think about paths and nooks, um, how you move through the space. You may not want a straight path. You might want one that's a little bit windy, but if it's too windy, you won't use it. Think about places for your family to sit and enjoy. You might want to think about rock gardening or grass gardening. I'm a little bit obsessed with grass gardening. And you might want to think about water and how it moves through the space. So, for example, um, if your water is just flowing out your downspouts and then into your driveway and into the street, 90% of that is going to evaporate into attainment basins. If you can instead, whether you use a rain barrel or not, channel that into the ground, you can water trees and your garden here in a passive way. That means they're going to take a lot less um, supplemental irrigation from you. So here's an example of, a rock river here in this RLD design where the water comes out of the downspout here and moves through this rock river to water the landscape in a passive way instead of pooling by the foundation, which you do not want. So it's also nice to move water away from your house where it could cause problems and into the garden where it can help with things. If you live in a zone that's in danger of fire, that's beyond the scope of this workshop, but basically you want less vegetation near your house and you want more fire-wise vegetation near your house, flammable stuff further away. You can use Google Earth to get measurements and square footages, which will help you make calculations for how many plants and materials to buy. And if you're trying to identify plants that are already in your landscape, you can use apps to do that. You can use something like my spreadsheet or like the website Bonap to figure out if the plant that you're interested in is native or not. Again, plants don't all have to be native, but it's good for our pollinators and birds, and these plants do so well here. When you're picking and arranging plants in your landscape, besides matching microclimates, I'd also suggest that you limit the amount of species that you use. The human eye really likes patterns. So if you use a large amount of like 3 to 10 species of flowers and you group them around your landscape so that your eye is led through the landscape when things bloom, um, that is going to be very peaceful to look at. I'm going to show you an example. When you're arranging plants, you want to start with the biggest plants and the plants that have the most structure year around and place them maybe in the back of your landscape to frame it, maybe dotted throughout it to draw the eye. After you plant those, oh, you can also plant them to kind of frame an area or create like an entrance to your garden. After you plant the biggest stuff, if you're doing a matrix garden, you want to scatter your ground covers evenly throughout the landscape so that they can spread out and become a green carpet. So kind of like the X's in this picture. And then you want to plant the flowers and you want to plant them in what we call groups and drifts. Meaning, again, like I was saying, here's a big group of gay butterfly milkweed, which is orange, a big group of prairie coneflower, which is yellow, sages scattered around, a big group of 4 o'clock here. And that really helps it look intentional and designed. This is what we call a drift in this P. Odolph garden. It helps move your eye through this space while you follow the patterns. And again, to do this, you don't want to use too many species. So find like maybe 3 spring, 3 summer, 3 fall species that you love so that you have something year round, as well as some plants you like for winter interest, and then group those throughout the landscape so that your eye is drawn around and you cannot help but notice the big groups of blooms. We already talked about that. And lastly, if you have some annuals, what we call short-lived dynamic fillers, that can also be biannuals or short-lived perennials, like these awesome Rocky Mountain bee balms, which get tall, but oh, they're so beautiful. Those are great to kind of scatter around of space, so they can help take up empty space while your garden is young, and they might disappear over the long term. Uh, and that spreadsheet I show you does talk about, you know, those short-lived fillers as well. In a dry, sunny spot, you want to use, well, I would suggest that you use our native prairie plants because they rocket there. If it gets a little bit wetter, you can plant some species that are native to the foothills of the mountains, as well as prairie species. And then as we move into the shade, you want to use things like sedges, strawberries, and native wildflowers like columbines, or coneflowers, or asters, or goldenrods that love it in the shade here. Ali, I was gonna talk about xeric lawn options and wildlife habitat, but I'm thinking maybe I'll save that for 102, and maybe we should just do Q&A for the last 9 minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think some of the questions we had are also kind of more relevant to that kind of install. So asking about like weed maintenance or some of those things. We did
Yeah,
have a question about buffalo grass and other like specifics on installing that. So maybe, yeah, like you said, we kind of wait for that section. Jump into some of the questions that we have that are design related now, and then yeah, can see where we land.
that sounds great. So yeah, I'm
Okay.
gonna ask you all to take a moment to think about what questions you have. I will, at the end of this slideshow, I'm gonna link to here, which is on my website. There's a ton of resources, including a DIY guide I wrote that talks about the nitty gritty of things like, you know, weed barriers and maintenance and xeric lawn options and how to install them and creating wildlife habitat and irrigation and all of those things. So if you can't come to the 102 workshop, you could buy that. It is just a PDF right now. Eventually I'll make it fancier, but it has a lot of info in it. And if you can come to the 102, we're going to talk about all of that stuff in more detail. This is more of the big picture workshop. So if you take a moment to sit with your questions and ask yourself, do I have a question that is likely relevant to a lot of people here? And it is more in the design or big concept stage, then perhaps you can send it over to Ali and we'll talk about it.
Great. Yeah, and I'll just mention a couple things while folks are getting their questions together, give you a chance as well for a break, Eryn. So that 102 seminar, the date of that one is Tuesday, March 31st, same time at 6:30. And you can sign up. Looks like someone just dropped the actually registration link in the Q&A. So it's right there, but it's also on resourcecentral.org. And then again, we have the link to the slides that I dropped in the chat, and we'll send up a follow-up email tomorrow that has the recording to this seminar, the slides, and all of these resources as well. So plenty of chances to look back on that. But I think if we do have a few questions that are very specifically kind of this design focused. And so one of the ones that came in was questions on software ideas or options that you have for mapping out your landscape. So you did mention Google
Ah,
Earth that has, or Google Earth that has the measuring tool. That was the one that you mentioned. But if you have other ideas, we had a question about that.
that's a great idea. Of course, drawing by hand is a great option. And there are, if you have any kind of like graphic or illustrator program that you can use for that and you're already familiar with it and you're just drawing your one yard, you might want to do that. The program I use is free, but it does take some getting used to. It's called Affinity and it's currently owned by Canva. It's kind of like a free version of Illustrator. But there are, yeah, I'm not the expert on all of the DIY design software options. I would say if you're just doing your yard, maybe just get a piece of graph paper so that you have a scale and then measure on Google Earth something like how long your house is. Let's say that the east side of your house is 50 feet long. Then draw that on the graph paper so that you have a scale and then note, okay, that means that each of these squares is 5 feet by 5 feet or something like that. And then you can start tracing out the outline of your landscape and use that to get your square footages and draw your design. That's how I used to do it before we did digital designs.
Great.
I can show it. Yeah. What else you got question wise?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And yes, and someone asked to type that out, and it was Affinity by Canva, and wrote that in the Q&A as well. So then there was another question for if the matrix gardening that's very grass heavy can be used in shadier areas. Do you have recommendations for grasses that can tolerate a little bit more shade, or are there other options to kind of help achieve that similar feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to talk about that at the end of this workshop, but I feel like I tried to cram too much in, so I'm going to talk about it in 102, and I
Mm.
also do talk about that in the DIY guide. But in brief, let's see, I can go back. Can you see my slides again, Allie?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, in brief, I'll just say buffalo grass is native to our area, and warm season grasses like buffalo grass are great for dry, sunny spots. Dogtuff grass is another warm season grass that also doesn't need to be mowed and doesn't need much or any long term supplemental irrigation. A warm season grass means that it is brown and dormant in between mid September and mid May. So if you don't like the look of it being brown, being asleep, then this won't work for you. They also really need full sun. This is the type of grass that's native to this prairie area, and they need full sun. So if you want it green, potentially green year round, and you have shade, some of the options you have are sheep fescue. Sheep fescue is not native, but what's awesome about it is it also only grows like 6 inches tall and then it stops. So this here is unmowed sheep fescue in one of my clients' yards. It's fantastic, and it's a lot lower water than typical lawn grass. It really only works in like a part shade situation, but it's definitely my favorite grass for part shade around here by far. As you get into full shade, then you start needing to look at either Kentucky bluegrass, which there are varieties that are lower water, or tall fescues, which are more shade tolerant and need less water than normal Kentucky bluegrass. I have a lot of people ask me about clover, and clover can be
Mm.
good for reseeding into your existing Kentucky bluegrass lawn. It will make it a little bit less thirsty, and also, you know, provide some nectar and fertilization.
Mm.
But it's really not doesn't it's not going to save you much water compared to these other options. So I would really suggest if you have par shade, do sheep fescue. If you have sun, do buffalo grass, or something like that. And then if you have full shade, maybe look into a tall fescue blend.
Great. That's really helpful. And really, I would say we had a couple of other questions I'll just mention about Firewise landscaping with, like you mentioned, it's a little bit out of the scope of this specific presentation, but we do have one also coming up that's on the seminar on April 22nd. So if you have those
Yeah,
questions about Firewise, great questions, very important. But we'll have a whole webinar dedicated to that. So I recommend checking that out on our schedule as well. But yeah, I would really say the rest of these questions are more kind of focused on that installation and the pieces it sounds like will be in 102. So
okay.
in the, yeah, in kind of thinking about the time and wanting to maybe tease a little bit for that next presentation, which of course,
Yeah,
folks, I know you have different schedules. We will be recording that as well. So hopefully you can make it. But if not, we'll have that on our YouTube channel as well after that happens. But
great.
thank you, everyone, and especially Eryn, also for all of your for attending this webinar and for hosting this. It was fantastic to kind of have that context, especially in this dry winter that we're having, about reasons why we're
Yeah.
thinking about this, and was fantastic to learn from you. So thank you so much for your time.